What I'm going to do now is say a little bit about science in general. Then I'm going to address the question of Marx and Engels and their work as anthropologists. And then, as Simon said, I'll talk about the origin of language and religion a bit. I sometimes hear it said that Marxism is a science. And when I hear those words, I always shudder. And in fact, it's quite strange because I'm currently just author of an article in the weekly worker called The Science of Marxism. And I completely disagree with the title of this article. I don't think Marxism at all is a science. I think it's just an entirely incorrect way of putting things. It's got nothing to do with what Marx or Engels said or wrote in their lives. So basically, in my view, and I think Marx's view and Engels' view, you have two fundamentally opposite types of knowledge. You have science on the one hand, and you have ideology on the other. Ideology is knowledge. Actually, science is knowledge as well, and all knowledge confers power. So what's the difference between ideology and science? Well, the difference is quite simple. Ideology confers power on some people at the expense of others, and science is empowering. If you're a human being, you can get power from science. Engels put it beautifully when he said that the more ruthlessly and disinterestedly science proceeds, the more it finds itself in harmony with the interests of the workers. So science has to be autonomous. It has to be working for itself. Science has to be a community of scientists putting science first and not any political agenda first. If it puts a political agenda first, that will be at the expense of science, and it will damage the revolutionary potential of autonomous science. There is no form of knowledge more revolutionary than science. And why do I think it's so wrong to say Marxism is a science? Why it's so dangerous to do that trick on it, of what Marx and Engels stood for, which we know was what was done throughout the period of Stalinism prevailing within the Soviet Union. As soon as I hear Marxism as science, I think of Lysenko. They always attempt to cut off Marxism from the rest of science and make a science of Marxism. And why it's dangerous is because it allows Marxists to think, oh, I don't have to be a scientist. I don't have to know anything about astronomy, biology, anthropology, chemistry, physics, climate science, because I'm a Marxist. And Marxism is itself science. So because I'm a Marxist, therefore it's scientific. And that's exactly the opposite of what Marx and Engels themselves felt and did. Marx and Engels felt they had to keep abreast of every current scientific development. And they even, as we all know, Marxism said, well, when a few people started inventing this thing called Marxism, he said, well, that's Marxism, count me out, I'm not a Marxist. So what we have to do, it seems to me, is we have to put science first, and our political battle is to maintain and defend the political autonomy of science. And in the present period, no task could be more urgent. As soon as we think, for example, of what capitalism's doing to our planet, as soon as we listen to the scientists who know about what capitalism is doing to the scientists, to the planet, we can hear the alarm bells ringing. And it's no good having a position on the climate or a position on climate science if you're not engaged in the science of climate. And all right, there are quite a few disagreements, there are quite a few controversies, of course, but they're actually within a very, very narrow band. And the scientific community is today agreed. If the global temperature goes up by more than 2 degrees, that's probably the tipping point. And by the tipping point, I mean, they don't always say this because they don't want to be accused of scaremongering. But it just means the future of life on Earth is very much in doubt. If it's 4 degrees, probably curtains. Probably it's exponential. Probably it's a positive feedback. And this lovely planet, as far as we know, the only one with life on it, will be another one of those lumps of hot rock or cold rock swirling around the universe. So science matters. What we do in the radical anthropology group is we do, as Simon said, we do try to put the big picture together. So anthropologists are studying what it means to be human, but you can't address that question, what does it mean to be human, without asking lots of other questions. What does it mean to be almost, but not quite human? So we look at gorillas, chimpanzees, we look at other intelligent, politically organised creatures, and we try to use studying, or even living with them. In the radical anthropology group, we got a comrade who's now working in the Congo with bonobos, Andrew Fowler. And he lives with the bonobos, he talks with them, he can speak their language, and there's no better way of getting to grips with what it means to be human than to get to grips and experience life with creatures that are so close to being human that you sometimes worry. I mean, Andrew himself can make he's also lived with common chimpanzees, he can make a pant hoot, and he gets louder and louder and louder with his pant hoot, and you begin to be a bit worried about him because he's sort of disappearing, and you just realise this is probably a human, but it's actually got quite a lot of chimp in him at the moment, and after a while he'll come down from this terrifying sound, and you sort of say, Andrew, are you all right? And when he does that, it just teaches you a little bit about the kind of world chimpanzees live in and the kind of language they are compelled to employ to get their points across. So that's studying other creatures close to being human, or our close relatives, is one way. Of course, another way is to ask what it might mean to be Homo erectus or some pre-human or pre-modern type of human. And of course, the way in which most anthropologists address this question is to do something a bit different. Instead of moving around in time, to move around in space, and to look at all the different ways there are of being human, all the different ways there are of being young kids, respecting the sacred, organising production, organising family life, and so on and so forth. So we get a perspective on this particular, rather unusual, so-called modern or capitalist way of life, and put that into a wider perspective. Okay, now the question that I was advertised as going to speak on, I think I will address it because it is quite an important one. It is primitive communism, myth or reality. I will talk about the main topic is the origin of language and religion, okay, primitive communism. I do sometimes encounter socialist, communist comrades who I don't think quite get what Marx and Engels meant when they described hunter-gatherer society and many pre-capitalist egalitarian societies as communists. And there is a kind of view quite widely around, I think, that maybe it's sort of communism, but it's a bit primitive. Maybe hunter-gatherers, maybe they've got so little that how can they be anything else than communists? They haven't got any wealth anyway, so obviously there aren't going to be wealth inequalities. And kind of a view that we can't understand the meaning of communism by working and living with contemporary hunters and gatherers. And that's not at all the message I get from reading Lewis Henry Morgan, or I get from reading Frederick Engels' The Origin of the Family, Private Property and the State. I'll just say quite briefly that hunter-gatherers, it's not just that they're egalitarian and that they share and that they don't have private property. The key thing, I think, for Marxists is that you can't have communism without abundance. In fact, without superabundance. As long as there's anxiety, as long as there's scarcity, there's going to be competition for those scarce resources, and that competition is going to lead to conflict, and the conflicts are going to lead to inequality. And I sometimes meet comrades who maybe haven't studied any anthropology, haven't thought too deeply about these issues, who think that hunter-gatherers are living in poverty or scarcity. And that is just so wrong. That misconception was put right a long time ago in this book by Marshall Sahlins, Stone Age Economics, and one of the chapters in here is called The Original Affluent Society. I was hoping that we could bring to speak here Jerome Lewis, who works with the Mengele forest people in Congo Brazzaville. because he can bring all this very much up to date, and I'm sure he will be willing to speak on a future occasion. But the crucial point is that hunter-gatherers live with abundance, and they have an assumption of abundance. They don't believe in scarcity. They believe that nature, the savannah, the forest, provides, and provides abundantly. And they conceptualize Western ideas about scarcity as ideology and as designed to make you feel that because a resource is scarce, therefore you've got to compete over it. And the two things kind of go together. The concept of scarcity goes with inequality, and egalitarianism goes with the experience of abundance. Of course, you might say, how can you say that, say, the Hadza or the Mbengeli are wealthy? And I don't know, maybe I'll ask Camilla, who's worked with the Hadza, and I've actually visited them a bit, to say a little bit about that. All I can say is that in the case of the Hadza that we've worked with, they know the two worlds. They can go to Arusha, they can go to the fresh pots, they can take some money, and they can get a bit of a taste of, if you like, Western life. And they can sort of appreciate it, and they can watch the videos, and they can go to the shops and get a bit drunk, and then they can get fed up with it, and they can go back to where they live, in the Yedda Valley. And all I can say is they have the world's best diet. They have the most healthy possible nutrition. The berries, the honey, the wild game animals. I mean, you just could not get a more healthy nutrition. And in addition, you couldn't have more extra time over and above work time to enjoy singing, dancing, and all the pleasures of life. And when they see Westerners trying to capture a part of their valley, various safari companies that then sell to Japanese or American or German or British, whatever, game hunters, say a week in the Yedda Valley so that they can go around shooting wild animals and paying a huge amount of money for it. They say, then they know that for people in the West, I mean, okay, let's put it a different way. Imagine you're really, really wealthy. Imagine you're, I don't know, Prince Charles or somebody, but even you can be more wealthy than that if you like. What is your ultimate dream? What will you spend that money on? And you'll find that probably most of these people's dream is to go safari hunting. And they may be, if they're lucky, they may be a week out there. And they pay a huge amount of money for that. And they had to just say, yes, but we do this all year round. I don't know if I've conveyed the point, but I'm trying to say that when you're with them, you realise why they put their life first and why they refuse, if they can possibly avoid going down the road of keeping goats, of doing backbreaking gardening, of going down the road the rest of humanity went down, they will avoid it. By the way, Lionel, I think, is going to talk a little bit about this afternoon, a little bit about the transition from hunter-gatherers to agriculture and the enormous resistance hunter-gatherers put to being forced into agriculture, horticulture, and eventually class society. So they have an experience of abundance, and by all standards, they have abundance. Of course, you can say they don't have televisions. And I can say, I can agree with you. I can say, I need a television. If I can't afford a television, I'm in terrible poverty. But I mean, in a sense, that's a reflection of my life, isn't it? The fact that I've got to watch stuff on television. Because there must be some vacuum, some hole in my life which makes me so interested in all this, fantasy stuff, which actually, if only I could be involved in the real thing instead of watching it on EastEnders or whatever I watch, would be probably a little bit more fulfilling. I mean, obviously, you can say that they don't have television, they don't have these things, all the different gadgets of capitalism and stuff. But Marxists don't see wealth in those ridiculous absolutist terms. Wealth is relative, it's social. And by any standards, hunter-gatherers are up there in an economy of abundance. Their egalitarianism is just the fact that there's no way in which you can be corrupted by honey, by berries, by game animals. You can be corrupted by money, and in fact the Hadza are very easily corrupted. give some money to the Hadza and they will immediately fall for it and spend it on drink. Immediately. And there's no way in which they can resist that. But there's no way equally in which, in their own environment, any of the things which they value can be used to corrupt or divide or disintegrate their egalitarian social structure in anything remotely like that way. Okay, right, religion. I was in Lewisham yesterday, and I was in the market, and I was on a lamppost. There was this little sticker, I think it had been put by somebody who belongs to class war, and it said, "Religion is stupid, murderous, bigoted, sexist crap." And when I read those words, I think, absolutely, I feel an immediate, instinctive solidarity with the people that write that. The most important scientist who pervades that view these days, that religion is stupid, is murderous, bigoted, sexist crap, is of course Richard Dawkins, who's recently written his bestseller called The God Delusion. And Dawkins thinks religion is crap. He thinks it's a kind of virus, a cultural virus which infects, like a parasite, our brains and other viruses infect our bodies. And one of the things he said, which is perhaps slightly less problematic, he said, with religion, the more stupid, the more absurd a belief, the more valuable it is, because if you can believe something patently absurd, it shows your commitment to the group far more convincingly than if you believe something which is credible and obvious. So, for example, if you are a Christian who believes that the piece of bread that you eat in church when you go there on Sunday is symbolic of Jesus' flesh, well, anyone can believe it's that, because it's symbolic. But if you actually believe it is the flesh of Jesus and the wine is Jesus' blood, well, I mean, that is extraordinary, and that it's so stupid that no one can believe it without an enormous cost, which then shows how committed you must be to be a Catholic. I have to say that when I look around at some of the left-wing groups around, I can realise that that rings bells. The more absurd the belief, the more it proves your membership and commitment to the particular sect that propagates this belief. So that's a convincing argument, but actually it's not Dawkins' main argument. That argument I would buy, actually. His main argument is that it's a parasite, which replicates itself in the way a computer virus does. So religion's stupid. Marx put it rather more cleverly. Religion, he writes in Hegel's Philosophy of Right, is the general theory of this world. Its encyclopedic compendium, its logic in popular form, its spiritual point d'honneur, its enthusiasm, its moral sanction, its solemn complement, its general basis of consolation and justification. It is the fantastic realization of the human being, inasmuch as the human being possesses no true reality. The struggle against religion is therefore indirectly a struggle against that world whose spiritual aroma is religion. Religious suffering is at the same time an expression of real suffering and a protest against real suffering. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the sentiment of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. The abolition of religion as the illusory happiness of men is a demand for their real happiness. The call to abandon their illusions about their condition is a call, therefore, to abandon the condition which requires illusions. A rather more dialectical and satisfactory and rich conception of religion than religion is stupid. And in fact, Marx goes on to say that there's no way of abolishing religion without realizing it. And there's no way of realising religion without abolishing it. And those two formulae, for me, just sum up everything. If you go back in time, if you go back through history, back, from one point of view, it seems as if society gets more religious, not less religious, until you get to hunter-gatherers. And hunter-gatherers are the most religious. And yet, they're the most emancipated, the most communist. And if you think religion is stupid, you've got this weird paradox if you're a Marxist, because then you've got hunter-gatherers are communists and they're stupid. They're the most communist and the most stupid. And of course, the paradox is resolved when you realise that the more you practice your religion, the more your religion, instead of being practiced on a Sunday in a certain building called a church, the more it's practiced every day of the week, everywhere where you are, and the more that instead of a few things being sacred, like this particular chalice or this crucifix or something, the more the water holes, the game animals, your partners, your landscape, these things are sacred, then the less it's religion. In a way, the more it's religion, the less it's religion. So when Marxists talk about abolishing religion, we mean abolishing the illusory communism, which religion is. But you can't abolish the illusory communism without realising communism. And the argument which we put forward in the Radical Anthropology group is that the human revolution, the process of becoming human, was the establishment of communism, and in a sort of sense, religion was essential to it. In one sense, the ultimate idea of religion, and the point about religion I think perhaps all of us could accept, is so simple. It's just this idea that some things are sacred. That's it. For capitalism, nothing's sacred. You can be a grandmother. If you make enough money, you can sell her. You know, nothing's sacred. Not just the Amazon rainforest or whatever it is, when you're logging. Nothing is sacred. Everything's got a price. For hunter-gatherers, some things are sacred. And that part of, if you like, religion, of course, is central to Marxism. For Marxists, some things are sacred. I suppose the most basic principle, perhaps, of the whole of the labour movement is the idea of the picket line. Never cross the picket line. You don't come up to a picket line and think, is it 3 people, 6 people, 12 people, how big are they? It's a picket line. You don't cross a picket line. And as it so happens, our argument in the Radical Anthropology group is that exactly that principle, never cross a picket line, was the foundation of culture, language, and religion. Never cross a picket line. Of course, eyebrows are sometimes raised and say, how can you have a picket line, back in, 100,000 years ago in sub-Saharan Africa? Where were the factories, where were the trade unions, where were the employers, and so on? How can you have a picket line? Very simple. Engels explains it beautifully in The Origin of the Family, Private Property and the State. The first form of class oppression is sexual oppression. The female sex is the productive class, if you like, or proto-class, more accurately, with monkeys and apes. The leisured sex, the sex which doesn't have to do the work of producing the next generation, is of course the male sex, that gets the female sex by impregnating the female, still the heavy work. And our argument is that with the emergence of humans, larger groups, more complex social demands, putting pressure on evolving human females to produce larger brain babies, very, very costly babies, needing an enormous amount of investment, childcare. Increasingly, females couldn't afford the costs of males who behave badly, if you like, males who just get you pregnant and then scoot off to get somebody else pregnant. Increasingly, the human female had to make sure that the male didn't have that option. And the strategies which led to religion and language were strategies designed to not just coerce, but also seduce and tempt and reward males into doing their share, if you like, of the childcare, investing in the future generations. And culminating in what we call the sex strike. Perhaps sex strike isn't quite adequate to convey the idea of what we're saying, because the idea of a strike does suppose that kind of resistance, endless resistance. This sex strike was more than just resistance. It culminated in revolution. It turned into a general strike. And that general strike could be repeated, because the general strike was a generalized sex strike culminating in revolution, which could then be called off. We could surrender the action, knowing that it could always be repeated. And in fact, it was repeated, according to our argument, once a month. I'm not here to go into all the details of this. Some of you may not have heard about it too much before. This is a beautiful little piece by one of the editors of the New Scientist magazine, Painted Ladies, puts together our theory in a context, the context of all the other work currently being done on human origins. I'll simply say that the argument is that resistance to exploitation, female resistance primarily against male exploitation, culminated in a revolution, culminated in the logic of strike action, the logic of the picket line, and this was the establishment of the principle that some things are sacred. And the argument we're putting forward is that if you can't establish that the body is sacred, if even that isn't sacred, if people can violate your body, then forget about anything else. Nothing will be sacred if that fundamental principle can't be established, and that was especially important for, of course, women. Simply because where violence is concerned, if violence is the game, males will always be a little bit better at that than females, better equipped at violence than females. So the need to establish that the body is sacred was a need for everybody, of course, but females, from females, and it was more pressing. Okay, now I now want to get on to language. Right, I'm currently writing a book on the origin of language. Been much too long in it. This summer I've thankfully broken the back of it, pretty much finished it. There are some things which pretty much I've decided to forget the computer, forget all the notes, all the references, let's get a big thick blue book and a ballpoint and every day write more. And I've pretty much filled up my blue book, and I've just about got to the end at long last. So then, of course, I've got to go back and put all the little bits in. So in the past, I mean, for anyone interested, there are quite a few edited volumes I've put together. The Evolutionary Motions of Language is one of them. It is here. So how do I introduce all this? Maybe I should just say a little bit about something I've spoken about before. I think it's true to say that every time I've been here in previous years, I've banged on about Noam Chomsky in a tirade against Noam Chomsky. It's inevitable, simply because Noam Chomsky is the giant. He just strides with, linguistics. Everybody seems to think that Chomsky is a revolutionary, a scientific revolutionary, on a par with Einstein, Darwin, Galileo. And it just happens to be impossible to talk about language or its origins without referring at least to Noam Chomsky. I'll be very, very brief here because I don't want to, many of you have heard it all before, but just very briefly. Chomsky is a Cartesian. By that he means he's a follower of René Descartes. René Descartes is regarded as the founder of modernism, the founder of modern scientific philosophy, and that's true. He is the founder of modern scientific philosophy. Descartes believed that language was located in the pineal gland. So between the eyes and the middle of the brain, there's this tiny little gland, the pineal gland, the third eye, if you like, and inside here there's a little wiggly bit, and in that little wiggly bit, the soul communicated with the body. Of course, Noam Chomsky doesn't quite put it that way, but he has a Cartesian outlook, and his view is that language is a tiny little organ in the brain, which he calls the language organ. And his theory of the origin of language is that in a random mutation, suddenly, in one individual, maybe 100,000 years ago, the language organ appeared from nowhere. First it was not there at all, then it just suddenly appeared, and as a result of this language organ appearing, the first person with it started talking to herself, or as he puts it, talking to itself. And if you don't believe me, here's his latest version of this thing on nature and language. Actually, you can use language even if you are the only person in the universe with language. And in fact, it would even have adaptive advantage. If one person suddenly got the language faculty, that person would have great advantages. The person could think, could articulate to itself its thoughts, could plan, could sharpen and develop thinking as we do it. Inner speech, which has a big effect on our lives. Inner speech is most of speech. So according to him, we spend most of our time sort of mumbling aloud, talking to ourselves. Almost all the use of language is to oneself, and it can be useful for all kinds of purposes. To figure out what you're going to do, to plan, to clarify. So when I figure out what I'm going to do, I have to talk to myself, and that's the main use of language. So if one organism just happens to gain a language capacity, it might have reproductive advantages, enormous ones. And of course that's, again, Cartesianism. That's the idea that I think, therefore I am. Everything happens in the individual. And he insists, absolutely insists, that language isn't for communication. What he says is that, he says, look, you can communicate with anything. I mean, look, you can slam the door as you go out of the room. That's not what doors are for, but you can slam the door to make a point. You can make a point with your hairstyle. Now, hair didn't grow there for linguistic purposes, but you can make a point with your hairstyle. Same with the clothes you're wearing. So he's saying the fact that you can use a door to communicate, or the fact that you can use the language organ to communicate, is irrelevant. Language isn't for that. Now, obviously, you know, I consider that completely ridiculous. My view is that Engels got it right long time ago. He's just writing about the development of labour. The development of labour necessarily helped to bring the members of society closer together by multiplying cases of mutual support, joint activity, and by making clear the advantage of this joint activity to each individual. This is in labour and the transition from ape to man. In short, as Engels puts it, men in the making arrived at the point where they had something to say to one another. So he's basically saying that chimpanzees, apes, pre-human humans didn't have language, not because they didn't have a language organ, because in a very important sense, they had nothing to say to one another. So, you know, of course, you can think of arguments about that. You can think, well, hang on a bit, surely many animals do have something to say to one another. They communicate. And of course that's true. It's also not true to say that animals don't cooperate, of course. Animals cooperate in all sorts of ways. So if you simply said, as a version of Engels' theory, animals don't have much language because they don't cooperate a lot, and humans cooperated a lot more, so they've got more sophisticated language. That theory wouldn't work, because actually Chomsky is right about one thing. Chomsky is quite right to say that language is off the chart, right off the scale, as far as any form of animal communication is concerned. Language is that you cannot make an argument that language evolved from some vocal signaling system of some ape men or ape creatures. The point about Darwinism is that the principle is descent with modification. So, for example, if you say, where did legs come from in the evolutionary past? They came from some primitive fins, some primitive fish with very stubby fins. Because they were not very good fins for swimming, they were too stubby, they were rather good for moving along on mudflats. So when in certain areas where the water ebbed away, these creatures could hop about from one pool to another, and these fins turned into legs. The point being that in order to get legs, you have to have a precursor, you have to have fins to start with. And the problem with the theories of the origin of language is this, and Chomsky's right on this point: we don't have a precursor. There's nothing in what I was mentioning before. When I mentioned Andrew Fowler doing his great cantaloot, and I can't do it, but it's something like I And I wasn't nearly. That is nothing. I know. I'm not claiming nowhere near what Randy was, because he obviously talked to chimpanzees much more than I. The thing is the point being made is that you can't get from that to what I do most of the time. I mean, sometimes we humans do get into that kind of stuff. We do. We have to shout and scream. But really, language isn't for shouting and screaming, and insofar as we're starting to shout and scream, we're losing it. And language is utterly, utterly, utterly different. Shall I just say a few things about what makes it different? First of all, the format is just utterly different. Does everybody know, I'm sure you do, what it means to say digital format as opposed to analog format? Analog means more or less. Digital means off or on. So if you have an analog recording machine, like a photocopier, what happens if you take a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy? After a while, you can't see what the hell's going on, because it's a copy of a copy of a copy. If it's a digital format, the reason it's every copy is just as good as the original. So you copy a DVD or a CD, doesn't matter how many copies you make, the last one's just as good as the first, assuming it's worked. That's because each little bit of it, of course, is either an off or an on. And if it's an on, it's completely on. You can't have it like a little bit on, because if it's not different a little bit on, it's not on at all. It's got to be completely on, and therefore all the little dots, all the little dashes, whatever, are totally and utterly there. Language is like that. It's actually at the deepest level, the format is digital. Doesn't mean I can't shout a bit, intonation can go up and down and so on, but the phonology is digital. So t and d. You can get from d, like din, to t, as in tin, and change the meaning by removing one of what's called the distinctive features. There are about 6 articulators in the human vocal apparatus. You can switch off voicing, switch it on, switch nasalization off or on. A number of other things, not very many actually, you can switch off or on. And according to the off, off, on, off, off, on, you've got a d, a m, a p, a l, a w, a z, whatever. And so it's a digital system at that phonological level. All animal communication is analog. With animal communication, the point of interest is the quality of the signal, the loudness, the size of the animal which must be making that signal. Is it a huge, great big caribou, or is it a skinny little one? I mean, it makes a huge difference, but the 2 caribou bulls are roaring at each other, each is like measuring out the other's strength on an analog scale. We don't think, oh, that's supposed to be a very frightening roar, right, okay, got it. It's not what it's supposed to be that's interesting. It's physically what signal is this? And then you evaluate that on an analog scale. With language, it's not just that the phonology is digital, it's also that the semantics is digital. So as you say tin versus din, or you change, you take off an n from a sentence. I'll meet you tomorrow. And you take an m off meet. I'll eat you tomorrow. Okay, that's a matter of life and death. At no cost, you've just removed a consonant. Merc has been removed, and so on. Could be a matter of life and death. Now, in other words, as you switch between these digital alternatives, you're switching between digitally contrastive meanings. And again, that just cannot happen and does never happen in animal communication. The meanings as well as the sounds, if you like, are on an analog scale, a more or less scale. With a possible exception, actually, of honeybees and maybe a few social insects that have got a kind of language the closest to what we call language, but that's not particularly relevant, of course, to human evolution. So you have digital format, you have what's called duality of patterning, the fact that you can have patterning on one level, organizing patterning on another level, the phonology and the semantics. You have what's called displaced reference, very, very important. As we speak, we're making changes which are in a displaced domain. That's not very good. That's jargon. Sorry. When I'm speaking, I'm making kind of interventions, but they're not changing anything in the room. They're not moving chairs, tables. They're not having an impact on your body, the changes made are in virtual reality. Hopefully, as I'm talking, I'm taking you to new places, but none of the things we've been talking about are in the room. So we've been talking about, I don't know, chimpanzees and all kinds of funny things, but it's nothing to do with anything going on here. And as you're listening to me, hopefully you're not just interested in the colour of my shirt and things about my physical presence in the room. So language means moving around in a virtual world. And rather than go through all the different things which make language radically different from anything which animals do, let's dwell there a bit, because this is going to take me to the next topic, which is religion. Okay, kind of a bit of a break, say something new, kind of philosophy. Essentially it's Marxist philosophy, but I think Marxist philosophy has gone to all kinds of places that most Marxists don't kind of realise it's gone to. So this has come through Ludwig Wittgenstein, John Austin, John Searle, very senior, very influential American philosopher, and I'll say it as simply as I can. We humans inhabit symbolic culture. And symbolic culture is a very weird world, because it's a world of objective facts which depend entirely on subjective belief. Objective facts which depend entirely on subjective belief. I won't bother to do my party trick with banknotes because I'll get in a muddle and mess around with them, but here's two £10 notes, here's one £20 note. It's objectively the case that these two tenors equal this £20 note. It's an objective fact, it's not my belief, not hallucination, it's absolutely objectively scientifically true, and yet of course entirely dependent on faith. Collapse of confidence in the currency. These two bits of paper, if they've got any value, are twice as valuable as this single bit of paper. Why? Because the faith in the paper has vanished. So, according to this way of looking at things, you've got two kinds of facts. You have what are called institutional facts. Another word, I suppose, is social facts. And Marx talked about the fetishism of commodities in countless different ways in Das Kapital, explained that some facts are institutional or social. And then, on the other hand, you have brute facts. The fact that if you put your finger in a flame, it'll burn, is a brute fact. The fact that if you fall off a roof, you'll probably go downwards instead of upwards, is a brute fact. All these things are like brute facts because they don't depend on faith. Even if you don't believe in gravity and you walk off the edge of the cliff, you still fall downwards. It's got nothing to do with belief. So a whole lot of facts have got nothing to do with faith, nothing to do with belief. They're called brute facts, and a whole lot of other facts are entirely dependent on subjective belief. Now, as soon as you realise that, you realise something about religion, which is very important. Now, when I say religion, I'm inviting you to follow Marx in thinking of the possibility of religion being more than just something you do on Sundays, or something you do with a part of your head in a certain building. Imagine that we've abolished religion by realising it, so that religion, if you like, is what we do every day. The communists, hunter-gatherers do that, their religion is lived. Then your world is a world of institutional facts. All the water holes, all the rocks, all the rainbows, the different animals, they've all got meanings and relationships which in the West we can sort of understand if you think about the currency system and other things. But we're living now in if you like, an enchanted world, a world of meanings and meaningfulness and connections which can be experienced as magical, and these connections they're absolutely real because you're in that culture. But don't say they're hallucinations, don't say they're not real. They are real for the people, and again, just going back now to Sabin and Benjeli, these are the people that Jerome Lewis studies. They have beliefs, and it would be foolish to say that these beliefs are like irrational fantasy or superstition. They have a belief about something which they call Aquila. I won't go on too long about Aquila, but it is in Jerome's PhD thesis. It's on the website. But an informant says Aquila is the same as Mokbuko. That's the name of the medicine Komba sent women when women put in the moon. They mean they menstruate. The business of Aquila was first with them. It's all about children. You can see women's tummies swell up at this time. It's the wind. They have to expel their wind as blood. This cleans out their wounds. If that blood stays in the body, it will make the woman ill, so she has to get rid of it. If she doesn't do Aquila, then she has to do Aquila. That's how it should be. Women's biggest husband is the moon. If I'm a hunter, I don't sleep around with different women. If I slept with her, then with her, then with her, and then with her, all the animals would know. They would smell my smell and know that hunter has ruined his own hunting. He's ruined his Aquila. Some will come with great anger. Others, you shoot them, but they won't die. You're very surprised. When you shoot at an antelope from close range and it doesn't die, we call this Aquila. And I could go on and on and on and on and on and on. The fact is that these beliefs are, in the same sense that I was saying hunter-gatherers live in abundance. It is abundance in that world. It's as abundant as you could get, and they don't feel scarcity. They don't feel they're going to fight over things. They're living in the most wealthy state you could possibly imagine. In the same sense, these beliefs which they have, because there's a bit of a shift, a kind of dialectical shift, these beliefs are science. They're not superstition. They're science because they're empowering. Any person who's hunting and gathering in that environment will be empowered by this way of looking at the world, which links the menstrual blood of women with the blood of game animals in this single concept known as Aquila, which, if you had to translate it, would mean medicine, healing, conservation, harmony, fertility, blood, and a whole lot of things all lumped together. And an ignorant person, and there are many ignorant people, of course, that take this apathy, would just think, oh, what a stupid superstition, what a ridiculous belief, let's cure them of it and let's give them some Western science. Of course, all the development agencies, UN and all these things, they're constantly trying to develop these people, which means get them to think in terms of the only thing that's sacred is money, and get them out of these hang-ups, if you like, these religious hang-ups. Those beliefs connect things in ways which are objectively scientific. They work. And of course, if you think about our science, I mean, it's not, we only know so much. We know what we need to know to get things done, to build our nuclear weapons, whatever it is we're doing. We don't know right down to the last detail all the stuff, all the, the quantum stuff at any one moment, because we don't really need to. So at any stage, science is information which confers power, and it goes as far deep down as it needs to go. Maybe I'll just give you another example, which again confirms Engels. Engels' theory about the early forms of kinship was that early human kinship was matrilineal. Absolutely fundamental to his book, The Origin of the Family, Private Property and the State. And he also argued that the first form of marriage was group marriage. Whole groups of men married to whole groups of women. Anyone's interested, you can look at the Radical Anthropology website. I've written a recent article in a big book called Early Human Kinship, published by the Royal Anthropological Institute. The title of my chapter is Early Human Kinship Was Matrilineal. It's turned out that Engels was right, the genetics proves it, everything else proves it. But among other things, early human kinship involved a concept which we call partible paternity. Which, if you want to really shock somebody, talk about partible paternity. This is a belief system being found in many parts of South America, Amazonia. My colleague Paul Valentine was one of the great Darwinian anthropologists who discovered this. What it means is this: you're a woman and you've got pregnant, and you want to do well by a baby. You want to make sure that your baby is really healthy. So what do? You look at a few other men and you say, well, I want you, and I want you, and I want you. And you have sex with these different men while you're pregnant. And they have this theory, and the theory is that to make a baby you need lots of sperm. A little bit isn't going to help, you're going to pack a lot in there, and you need some pretty good sperm from men that you've chosen. And it, you get quite a bit of it, and it goes in there, and it makes a very healthy baby. Paul Valentine, my colleague at University of East London, and his mate Steve Beckerman, they did some tests, and they tried to work out whether this belief that women have is scientifically true. Is it true that a woman who has sex with another man or two to add to the number of fathers that the child has got, so that a man's got additional fathers. Is it true that that will mean that the baby is more likely to survive to adulthood? Yes, it is true. Women who have sex with extra men, giving their babies extra fathers, they do better. Of course, it's not quite because scientifically the sperm is actually necessary to fertilise the egg. It's because having a few dads means that there'd be more presence, and if this dad dies, if we've got some other dads, and all the different dads will all think they're probably the father, so they'll be kind to the child, and all kinds of reasons. But still, it doesn't alter the fact that the women who believe this have very good reason to believe in particle paternity. Any other belief, such as the Western belief that actually only one sperm is needed to fertilise one egg, therefore you should only have one husband, would actually be damaging. It would be damaging to them in their society. Okay, now, just coming finally to language. Because we live in a world of institutional facts, as well as brute facts, of course. I mean, we're not just in the world of institutional facts. Obviously, physical realities, chemical realities, biological realities there as well. But we overlaying brute facts are institutional facts. So we have, I don't know, how do I explain this? I mean, I mentioned money, but actually, the fact that this is a meeting, that this counts as a chair. The double lines on the road mean you mustn't park there. The fact that, I don't know, some guy called Gordon Brown, is it? Especially the Prime Minister. I mean, all these things, they're true because people believe in them. As soon as confidence in these things collapse, just like with a picket line, of course. If we had a picket line, and the people on the picket line didn't think it was a picket line, and nobody else thought it was a picket line either, of course it wouldn't be a picket line. So we live in a world which is brute and physical, and yet these brute physical things have, if you like, symbolic values. So we inhabit this world of belief. Only a creature that has to navigate within that virtual landscape either would need language or could have language. The reason why language can be digital is because all institutional facts are digital. You can't have a more or less institutional fact. Like you park in the wrong place, some parking meter attendant sat a fine on your vehicle, and you say, "What are you doing?" And if he says, "Right, I'm sort of a traffic warden," you won't be very happy. He's going to be either a traffic warden or he's not a traffic warden. Same with any other institutional fact. It either is or it isn't. One of the examples that you can find in the literature is opening Parliament. The Queen opens Parliament. Well, if you open a door, you can leave it half open. But you can't. The Queen just can't leave Parliament half open. I mean, half open. Where the hell are we? Is it open or not? So with all institutional facts, because they rest on agreement, and you can't reach agreement on the slippery slope, they have to be cut and dried. They have to be either or. As soon as there's any doubt, then the fact starts to collapse. It's just like saying with money. You can't say this is sort of a £20 note, but it's maybe only worth 19 quid. Commerce would come to a halt. Nothing can work on that basis. Because language relates fundamentally to institutional facts. When anyone's speaking to somebody else, of course you're relating to the world, but you're relating to the world indirectly. The semantic meanings of the words aren't brute facts, they are institutional facts. And so only a creature that has become immersed in a world of shared fantasy, in a sense, shared fantasy, in other words, only in a way a religious creature, could even have language. As we became human, as we turned the world upside down through revolution, as women signalled to potential dominant males their defiance, as they collectively gave signals which were the reverse of the signals the dominant male expects to receive, in our language, as females got together and signalled wrong sex, wrong species, wrong time, turning the world upside down. That upside down world, the revolutionary world, the communist world if you like, was a world of fantasy in a sense, but shared fantasy. And when fantasies are shared, when they're generalised and in the empowerment they give, then that's a very different thing from fiction, from lying, from hallucination, and in fact, the whole of symbolic culture depends on that. And even when you look at little children, anyone who's got children, grandchildren, And just look at how they become linguistic, how they first begin to use words. It's fundamentally through fantasy. If a child that doesn't understand pretend play, that doesn't get into fantasy worlds, probably it's rather worrying. A child that can't play, can't get the idea of let's pretend, that's a diagnostic feature of possibly autism. Autism, one of the ways in which autism these days is described is mind blindness. If you take when I pencil here, it's supposed to be an aeroplane. Well, the fact is it's just a piece of plastic. It's not an aeroplane. But an autistic child just wouldn't get what nurse is thinking. It's just saying, what on earth is this guy doing with a bit of plastic? So to not be autistic is to be able to mind read and to see in this not just the plastic, but the representation which the person making this funny noise and making this movement is trying to get across. So if you can't fantasize, if you can't hold in mind the brute fact and the institutional fact simultaneously, you're not going to get into language. Now I'll just end on this now, I think. What Jerome Lewis, working with the Bengeli, has shown is that Bengeli religion, actually, it's play. What happens is that children play. They engage in social pretend play. The girls play games, the boys play games. They play games, kind of gender-structured games. Boys against the girls against the boys. They're endlessly laughing, pretending to be elephants, chasing each other, pretending to be forest spirits. And the point about their play is that it's fun, and it's laughter, but actually it's, as with all children's games, when children play games, it's in a way quite serious. You come in as a spoil sport and spoil the game. It's a terrible thing to do. And the most important thing about the person that you're fond of is that they'll let you play with them. So these games that the forest people play are quite important, in fact very important, and the rules of the games are sacred. Now, I'm coming to the basic point of Jerome's work. He points out that they have this word masana. And masana, rather like Aquila, meaning menstrual blood, the moon, blood of game animals, and a whole lot of other things which we wouldn't necessarily in the West put together, masana means play. It means any work which is enjoyable and collective, like gathering honey or going out hunting. It also means ritual. It also means religion. And the point is that they play in a way which allows them to continue playing through childhood, adolescence, into adulthood. And when they play the same games as adults, that's religion. It's the same games stretched into adulthood becomes their religion, which, if you don't want to call it religion, because religion's stupid, I don't mind what you call it. You can call it magic or something if you want to. It doesn't make any difference. The crucial point is that monkeys and apes don't do that. They do play. They play when they're small. They have play fighting. That's the nearest they get to symbolism. So imagine two monkeys, biting each other, but it's only in play. Each bite is it's a brute fact, a bite, but it's actually a kind of pretend bite. It's a symbolic bite. The meaning is different from the physical shape of the bite. So the nearest animals get to symbolism and language is when they play. The problem is that with mammals in general, but primates in particular, as they become sexually active, something happens. And you can imagine what it is. You've got two little chimps, playful, playing with each other, and now they become sexually active. And suddenly, it all ends in tears. The play fight ends in a real fight. And so, the playfulness of early years does not survive that transition into adulthood, and therefore, life as a whole isn't governed by play. Humans manage to become human by extending the joys, the sharing, the shared fantasy of play into adulthood by incorporating sex into the game. And the game was this game we've talked about before, was the game of wrong sex, wrong species, wrong time. I haven't got time to go into too much detail, but it's as if revolutionary females were signaling with their bodies, with their dancing, to any male who wanted to misbehave, no, you don't screw us, we screw you. You see? Thank you. obviously, as a Marxist, I agree with both of you in 90% of it. But I mean, well, what's your job?
Law. I teach law.
So you're a teacher?
Yeah.
So, okay, yeah.
So 90% of what I try and spend time trying to persuade students is not to believe that there is a clear answer. The law is not mainly about parking on double yellow line, which the answer is yes, no. That's what I spend most of my time doing, is trying to tell people it's not digital.
I mean, well, no, you're arguing about the facts, whether they are facts or not, and of course there's always room for a huge amount of debate and stuff, but at the end of the day, as you yourself say, the judgment is that either you did or you didn't, but you cannot have a law which is like, you know, more or less, it will start to collapse. So either you are the solicitor or not, either this document at the end of the day is valid or not. No one would be so crazy to say you don't dispute these things.
It can be sort of
Yes, of course it can be sort of valid, but I mean, then all I'm saying is, when it's sort of valid, you're going to get an argument. Yeah. You're going to get an argument. So therefore, it's not a fact. It only becomes an institutional fact when you've gone through the argument and arrived at some agreement. Maybe you never do arrive at an agreement, in which case the whole thing could end up in a fist fight, which is about brute facts. But at the end of the day, institutional facts, if they're facts, are facts because through all the arguments you've arrived at some agreement. That's what I can say about that. I mean, I'd be crazy to deny that in the course of getting to an institutional fact, like establishing the law or working out that you really are a policeman or whatever it is, you know, that there's not going to be all kinds of room for debate and confusion and doubt and everything else, of course, yeah. But they don't become facts, and never will become facts until you've reached some point of agreement at some level. I'm not saying everything totally agreed, but for current purposes, this will serve as a banknote, even if it's a bit dirty and whatever else, you know. That's as far as I can get. On Nick, that was the only thing you asked, isn't it? I'm not leaving out that question. I think
was the banknotes, that it's not just that it's armed.
Oh, sorry, yes, about Zimbabwe. Well, of course, again, as a Marxist, when I say it depends on belief, obviously the belief in turn has to be explained in a materialist fashion through analysis of history, class, violence, the state, the economics, and everything else. Of course. But still, if the army isn't sufficiently brutal and strong enough to sustain the confidence of the troops in this mad currency, then that brute fact that the army can't do it will then have an effect on the belief, which in turn will have an effect on whether this actually is, you know, currency or not. So I mean, obviously, clearly that's true. I absolutely agree. On religion, I thought I was making a very, very, very clear distinction between ideology and science. That was the whole point. I am an atheist. I think we can't get anywhere if we, if we compromise on religion. That's absolute, death knell for the revolutionary struggle. We have to be scientists. It's just that the science that we need is putting it all together. It's the big picture, and as we put it together and self-organise on the basis with our colleagues elsewhere in other areas of science on that basis, then our analysis of the world becomes increasingly subjective, as again Marx put it becomes practice. And that revolutionary practice will then have some of the features of what you might want to call religion in traditional cultures, in the sense that things would be meaningful, they'd be connected together, the idea that some things are sacred of it. If we follow what you're saying is interesting about the Benjeli. The Benjeli think that elephants turn into humans and humans turn into elephants. And you're saying, yeah, I mean, that's, if you really scratch this elephant, you'll find actually it's got tusks and various other things, and it's obviously not a human being. And if you go to a person who thinks they're an elephant and look carefully, you probably find they're not really an elephant. The thing is that the concept that some things are sacred does really require you not to do that, actually. Because if you think about it, if you did that with a picket line, you come up to the picket line and say, you're calling this a picket line. Physically, after a while, you'll find out there's actually a bunch of people, and what's sacred about it? I mean, you could do that. And the same thing with wrong sex, wrong species, wrong time. What our argument is that when women, the origin of culture, started insisting, painting up, looking very sexy, but at the same time insisting, actually we're elands, we're animals. We're doing an eland bull dance. And actually we're all menstruating. And actually we've got cocks. Now, what we're saying is that the male who would, not accusing you of anything, but I'd say the male who decides to start probing this. Oh, actually, no, I think we're a female. No, you don't look like a bull. No, hang on a minute. You know, you're claiming you've changed sex, but haven't you got tits? I mean, what I'm saying is that wouldn't be very respectful. And it's the women's job to insist. Actually, we're animals, we're all menstruating, and we've all changed sex, and it's in your interest, actually, to go along with this hallucination. And you should go along with this hallucination, because when you go along with this hallucination, you'll be human. You'll be in another world, in an empowered world, and if you insist that facts are facts on a brute level, that's going to keep you in a brute world, actually. So, but don't think that Ben Jelly get confused. When they meet an elephant, they know perfectly well it's not their girlfriend or something. I mean, they know it's an elephant, and when they meet their partner, they know that's on one level they're absolutely as realistic as anybody else. But on another level, they've just got to respect these magical transformations, because if they don't, they won't hunt any elephants, they all be at each other's throats, and they won't survive. So they've got to go along with the magic, and it's actually scientifically a good idea to go along with it. And when those, what could be hallucinations, are shared and empowering, I'm arguing they become science in pretty much the sense that our science is science. Because I've argued that what science is, it's like ideology, it's knowledge, and it's like ideology, it confers power. But the only difference, and that's why I thought I was making a very firm distinction, is that science is knowledge which confers power. Full stop. Ideology confers power on some people at the expense of other people. So when Trotsky said science is knowledge that endows us with power, he meant knowledge which endows us, humans, across the planet with power. If you believe that water is H2O and you electrolyze water, you get 2 volumes of hydrogen, 2 volumes of oxygen, that's empowering. It doesn't matter who you are, what class you are, what race, what sex, Protestant, Catholic, water is H2O. You know? It's empowering to know that, and various other things, of course, about science. So when it's empowering everybody, it's science. So what I'm saying is that the rainbow snake idea, or the Ulan Buddha idea, or the idea that these women are elephants, or whatever, when that idea empowered everybody, in the same sense that science, if it empowers, knowledge empowers everybody, it's science, in that sense, it was science, and it is science. So I think I'm making a very clear distinction, because the kind of religion, but if we say religion's going to be overthrown, yes, of course. This whole lot of ideology, which empowers certain people at the expense of others, obviously with all these patriarchal religion, it empowers men at the expense of women, and Pope at the expense of everybody else, or whatever it is. These going to be overthrown, of course. They're ideology. They're not science, of course. I couldn't possibly hold my head high as a Marxist if I said anything. If I mixed up science with a religion, it would be terrible. I don't think I'm doing that at all. But if you read Marx, you can understand why, it's a bit subtle, why you could think that Marx is mixing up science and religion. Religion is the general theory of this world. It's an encyclopedic compendium. It's logic in popular form, etc., etc. Marx is saying that. Is he mixing up science with religion? I don't think so. It's just being dialectical. Made a point about language, which is a lovely one, about it's a string of jokes. And actually that's Bakhtin's idea, and it's a marvellous idea, and it's correct, actually. Wrong sex, wrong speakers, wrong time was just a hilarious joke. I mean, imagine it. A man wants some sex, and all these wretched women are elephants. I mean, it's not like, whatever. I mean, it's a huge, funny joke. And with a joke, even however absurd the joke is, the point, if you've got a sense of humour, is to read the intention behind it and kind of get the joke. But actually, every single word in language starts out, actually, as a metaphor, which then gets conventionalized. And in a way, a metaphor is a joke. A metaphor is a false statement. Every metaphor is just wrong if you are mind-blind, if you're autistic, and you just want the literal truth. Every single bit of language, when it starts out, is just, you just cannot get it. You have to get how something which is literally false is true on another level. You have to get the joke. Language is a mass of settled down, ossified jokes that we've forgotten how funny they were when they started. Okay? So, lovely point, and I didn't make that enough, but don't worry, it's in my book, it'll be up there. The point that Mike made about Dawkins, of course, is the key point, isn't it? I mean, it would be so wrong if Dawkins was able to think about us lot, I mean, I'm sure he doesn't care too much about us, although he does bump into us now and again, if he thought all of us are like soggies. He's trying to get rid of religion, he's trying to get it out of the school system, he's trying to avoid the legitimizing of religion for political purposes, he's trying to stop creationism being taught in America or anywhere else on a par with Darwinism and stuff, and then us lot come and say, yeah, but actually religion's got some good points, you know, it's not all bad, some of it's okay, some of it's actually quite sad. I mean, if that's how it came over, it would be disastrous. We have to be more hostile to religion than Dawkins, if anything, you know, but in order to be effective in that hostility, we have to have some answers, as we've been saying. But it would be, and see, I do think that, say, Terry Eagleton and some of those excellent scholars who've been criticising Dawkins' work, I imagine Dawkins' response is, oh, all you cultural theorists, you're all ending up in bed with the Pope at the end of the day, you know, all of you lot. I can sort of hear Dawkins thinking that all this is just being soggy. And that's a danger to be avoided. So the point about Dawkins being a scientist on one level, and as soon as he starts about religion, he suddenly is a political activist. Actually, that echoes a little bit with my analysis of Noam Chomsky. It's actually not as illegitimate as Chomsky. I think Chomsky is a total counter-revolutionary in his science, even though he's quite radical in his politics. I don't think that particular dichotomy can be made. But we have Chomsky as he has two lives. One of his lives is activism, and the other one is his so-called science. And Dawkins has two lives, his own science, and then he has his political persona, and he doesn't pretend that it's scientific. And I think that's right. Finally, just on the science thing, I'll just say that's very lovely what you say. I just wanted to add something, which is that we communists, we socialists, haven't been recently, at any rate, too successful in doing what we set out to do, or what Marx and Engels thought we would have got eventually to do. We haven't actually. We've got various little organisations, we're trying hard. But if you look at the scientific community, as an example of no borders, as an example of an international community, as an example of an international community that's pretty much increasingly, at any rate, self-organising on some really important issues which have huge anti-capitalist or potentially revolutionary political implications, the scientific community, much to my regret, is actually doing a little bit better than we are at the moment. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to say, what Marx and Engels thought of is like all of us becoming scientists. The working class will be the best scientists. Why? Because if you're in a working class environment, you're not subject to those corrupting pressures which scientists as individuals in their various institutions are subject to under capitalism. In order to be free and autonomous, you have to find a social space which allows that freedom or autonomy. And the proletarian movement is that framework. Now, increasingly, it seems to me, insofar as scientists are beginning to get active and put things together, it's around the issue of climate, and insofar as they are putting things together and proposing solutions, those logically come absolutely up against the logic of capitalism. There's no way they can get anywhere within the capitalist framework. So potentially, insofar as they are self-organising, they are becoming, if you like, an international. And at the moment, in some ways, they're doing better than us, partly, I think, because we're not giving up enough. So maybe we should keep up a bit more. But I'm simply saying that a communist organisation will be the scientific community going the whole way, self-organising and becoming the revolutionary advance guard of the proletariat. That's what Marx and Engels had in mind. They didn't have in mind a set thing called Marxism, which itself is a science somewhere else. They didn't have that idea at all. And that actually, that Stalinist idea is taking Marxism down the road of religion.